Welcome back to Good Revenue. We're here today with Shinyoung Park. She has built 23 consumer products from the ground up as a founder or head of product from the seed stage all the way up to a public company. So from 3 to 15,000 employees. And this has resulted in more than 42 million users and $88 million in revenue, which is incredible work. Welcome, Shinyoung. We're excited to have you today.
Thanks for having me, Nina.
Pleasure. So we'll jump right in. I know there's a lot of topics we wanted to cover today. And one of the ones that I know you and I have a shared passion about is around data and monetization. Could you tell us a little bit about how you've brought some of that to bear in the companies that you've led and maybe some of the companies that you're mentoring today?
Yeah, definitely. First of all, as a first generation immigrant, to prove myself, I need to make an impact. And working with numbers was the best way to make an impact. And so for me, like number has been always like my bread and butter. And I love even tracking my personal body numbers. My belief is once you track, you can improve it.
You're
So
living.
when I first moved to San Francisco, I had my startup and I didn't know what I was doing. So the first one failed. And since I joined other startups as a head of product, like I was seeing the world where the company's at and interpretation of number, that of the world we are at, and how do we interpret that as a number? And our product world and where customers at, how to interpret that in the world. So that's all about, I think that's all about how I see the success of the company and how company meet the product market fit. So how we position in this competitive world is basically market data and where we rank in the market and what's coming up next. So we interpret that into numbers to figure out what to launch next and what kind of features to launch next to stay at the competitive edge in the market. How consumers are using our product, what to build next, and how to improve the ARPU or retention and engagement, all comes down to numbers. For example, I look at how users are engaged our features or getting churned. And at that point, what are the things we need to do to improve that churn, all the way down to feature building, to all the way up to the top level revenue, and it's all connected. That's how I use numbers to improve our product and the competitive edge of the company.
It's so interesting because if anything, I think you're alluding to something that I see too, which is that there is so much data. There are so many things that you could track and so much information you can ingest and analyze. And I think one of the challenges for a lot of companies is what is the data that matters? How do you think about some of those challenges so that you're really looking at the information that can help you make better decisions, build better products, et cetera?
Yeah, as a data person, it's so easy to get into the rabbit hole and look at every possible data and like just cannot get out of it and figure out what's the most important lever to move the needle. It comes down to user experience. What's the majority features our users are using? What's the value we are providing? And how that's interpreted into numbers. For example, in the consumer app, there are lots of buttons, but the essential journey of what users are going through is one or two funnel. And just focus on that numbers. And if you go into the rabbit hole, you are touching the features and elements that's not really essential to moving the needle and bringing revenue to the company.
Do you think that there is greater clarity on the consumer side because the gap is shorter between revenue, profitability, and utilization? Sometimes in B2B, it turns out that what is popular is not necessarily what's going to be well monetized. And so I think there's some opacity there. So do you think that line of sight is clearer on the consumer side? And that's why you're suggesting that utilization and engagement are such important metrics?
I think in terms of engagement versus monetization, it's not that different. 90% of engagement might come from one feature that's not contributing to revenue. However, it can be a leading features and leading
Hmm.
data that
Hmm.
can get as a proxy number. And eventually that leads to revenue. And without that feature, even if that feature itself doesn't make money, it may not lead to the revenue. So I think it all goes together. But the leaders have to keep in mind that it's all connected. Even if one feature doesn't make money, if we remove that feature, we may not make money.
I know that you had a really great experience working with Spoon and you helped them achieve profitability. Could you tell us a little bit about that company and what that experience was like?
First of all, Spoon Radio is an audio live streaming platform. We have a presence in Asia, such as Japan, Southeast Asia, Korea, and also in the US. We are growing at that time. And from product perspective, I would like to discuss how we analyze all the data and the revenue contribution by future, because it's more about the data and the product other than the how we made decisions around operation and financials. Does it sound good?
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
Yeah. So first thing I did was looking at all the features and how users are engaged with the live streaming experience and what are the moments people spend money on. So we had all the features and revenue contribution by consumer lifecycle. With that in mind, we also looked at how revenue and profit is connected and what are the costs related to it. For example, the platform fees and the streamer fees. From the consumer experience side, we looked at the number of sessions and how often they are engaged with the streamers so that we can encourage users to spend more time and engage with the streamers more frequently. It's like a playground for streamers and listeners to hang out. Giving more opportunities for them to hang out and more frequently give us a more opportunity to turn the experience into a revenue. And we also optimize the platform fee as well as the streamer fee, where it doesn't really affect the consumer experience, but it gives a lot of leeway in terms of having a bigger revenue contribution. We did everything in every quarter, looking at what are the things that we can have a highest impact in the revenue, and we optimize those experiences and the structure.
Was there anything else around how you were able to do this so quickly? Had some of the work been done before you got there, or was it that you, because of the experience that you had, you were able to leverage that and implement more quickly?
Previously, we talked about how B2B and B2C might be different or what important data we need to look at. If we get into the rabbit hole, we might have to optimize hundreds of things and not really make an impact. But with my experience, I knew what are big needles we have to move to make a big impact. For example, it's like consumer experience, but we knew if users are visiting streamers' profile more often, there's a higher chance of for them to going to their live streaming experience. There was like a biggest optimization we could do to improve the number of sessions. So we had a presence of visiting profile experience into multiple screens. That it may be very easy, engineering wise, it takes a few days to do that, but as for impact, it moved like 30% of the profile visits. And as a result, we had a lot longer sessions in live streaming.
Looking at the market broadly, there are fewer profitable companies, whether it's going IPO or the fact that the public markets have shrunk even as private companies are growing. M&A is down the last couple of years. I spent a lot of time thinking about business models and viability. I wonder, because I know this is something that you're interested in too, what do you think that founders or CEOs, executive teams can do to focus on some of these issues earlier in the life cycle of a company?
Yeah, that's a really good point. You mentioned that in like 1980s, like number of companies going IPO were profitable, but now not anymore. And I think for the last 3 years, it's also changing because of how the market is changing, and with AI popping up, companies are a lot more cautious about the profitability and cost sensitive. And I've seen for the last 2 years, if startups from 500 Global or Techstars are focusing on monetizing right off the gate. If they're charging subscription, they're not giving a free trial. They're just with the value prop. If I'm providing 10x higher value than what's out there, customers should be willing to pay for it. So that's their belief to make the really engaging product and valuable product and charge them right away. So I think the trend is a little changing, especially it's become very hard for startups to raise money unless they are already bringing in revenue. So for example, there's one company, subscription company, who is helping people to focus better because everybody's working from home. And they had a Zoom session with the facilitators for employees working from home. And without people charging, they couldn't try any trials. But competitors were having trial experiences, and there were like 10 other competitors, but they're charging off the gate because they really believe that they can provide a lot better experience than competitors, and they're doing well.
I appreciate you referencing the University of Florida data. I think it's interesting and we'll include it in the show notes. I'm curious about the business model and viability question. What you're saying, I have a different take on it. I think a lot of founders confuse benefits and value in my experience. Benefits meaning anticipated utility or the perception around what we think something is worth, with the very yes or no question of, are you willing to pay for it and how much? That's where I feel companies aren't doing the work early enough. There's a lot of reliance on, hey, this thing is great and we have amazing engagement. And they don't ask the question of, but how much is it really worth to Shinyoung or to Neeta or whoever, right? Are you seeing that too?
I want to understand the question better. So you're asking if founders and CEOs are saying this is value, not necessarily in the dollar amount, but with the engagement number, saying that's the value.
I think a lot of companies get very confused between engagement and what they perceive a customer cares about versus the question of, is the customer actually paying you for XYZ feature, et cetera? And I think this happens when you raise prices or when you start to charge for something, that's when it falls away, which is why I think there's a difference too. It's not just the question of charging, it's the question of, do we have the right value metric? Are we charging in the right way? Have we correctly assessed what it is the customer cares about? That is something that I have seen in my work. Are you seeing something similar or not?
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, I get what you're saying. And that I guess that's why the company like you exists. They need that you're really good at pricing strategies. I'm even talking to a behavioral scientist this afternoon to discuss more about pricing strategies. It's to do with psychology. Even if we charge $500 or $2,000, even if it's the same product, depending on what the offer is and how we are packaging it, who we are talking to, the price and value to that specific customer can be drastically different.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great point. And I don't know if it's just we can do it with the A/B testing. I think at first there should be a reason that you are charging a certain price because
Yeah.
we are in the beta phase and I want to get volume of users to test. The price might be lower, but not completely zero. As you build more value to the product and the product gets better, you can charge more because the dollar value of the product like just objectively goes up.
I think there is some really interesting world in kind of behavioral research and behavioral economics that can apply to pricing and value as a spectrum. And I think you're talking about it that way too, right? Because the strategies and insights are different earlier in the life cycle of a company. In a mature market or a competitive market, there's a missed opportunity for a lot of companies at all stages. Is this question of, what does the customer care the most about out of my offering or my suite of products? And then what's the relative prioritization? What are the weights on the customer side? Like Shinyoung might like this widget that we've built, but maybe it's like your 100th priority. So you're going to give us $5 a month for that. And I'm thinking it's a $10,000 a year product, which happens. We've both seen companies like this where there's a huge gap between what I perceive the value to be and what you, the customer, are actually willing to pay for. I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to add to it, but I just am endlessly fascinated by this conversation.
Yeah, that's so true. There's a Lenny's podcast talking about how startups found product market fit. And the Canva or Notion, they were like churning features like crazy, go like launching features. And there's one feature there was, let's try it. And we may not get anywhere, but it's not easy, like difficult to launch. And they launched the feature that brought in a lot of customers. And it's also related to timing. If we are launching multiple features and like, if it's something new that was very timely, they might be the feature that bring in a lot of value. So I think there's no one way answer for that, but I agree with you in terms of the context and the theory behind it.
Yeah, I love that too. And I also enjoy that podcast. I think there's some really interesting work there. We were talking a little bit earlier about revenue quality and EBITDA. One of the things that I also see is companies, especially if they're earlier or smaller, they underestimate how important it is to have high quality. And I call this good revenue. It's the clients and the deals that are working for you short and long term. That's how I see the world. But obviously, EBITDA quality, it could also be clients that are renewing, shorter sales cycles, more predictable revenue, not in the SDR sense, but in the idea that I know Shinyoung has been our customer for 5 years and is likely to renew, that kind of thing. How do you see the world when it comes to revenue quality or EBITDA quality?
When you brought up the question, I feel like there's the fundamentals of the business.
I know. You think so, right? Am I just being simplistic? I can take that feedback, but you would be surprised how often I come across a lot of companies where they have one of the challenges that's coming up that I hear more and more now is revenue concentration. They have anywhere between one or less than half a dozen customers that are up to 90% of the revenue in really substantial sized businesses. I wouldn't call that high quality EBITDA. It's wonderful that you have this high profile customer, but you're overly reliant on one or a few big customers. How can you grow, scale, and sustain a business like that, right?
So too much dependency and almost like you the client space. It's not necessarily like a scalable and repeatable business. For example, there's a company called Ipsy. Their year-over-year retention is 85%, meaning
Amazing.
like they have an amazing product. And this fundamentally, that's the product and that's the business. And unless they're the retention, what's out there? Like everybody's running to get more deals and customers are churning over there. And it's basically a leaky bucket. So I think it's fundamentally how are you building the product that's so engaging, like people don't want to leave and like people can stop talk about. I think that's can be very challenging, but I think that's the like how we build like great EBITDA and that's a great business. For example, there's a company called Wise. They offer the international money transfer between different countries. And if I go to Chase Bank or Bank of America, they take away $30 and it take a week. Wise, 3 minutes, $5. And it's I cannot stop talk about it to other people. And how they did it was basically they built banks in different countries. Like how they imagined like doing that because they just wanted to have an amazing user experience. And once you have that, that's a viral just happens. And K factor, like you don't have to optimize a lot of things because you provide something that people will say, wow. I think that's like a fundamentally healthy business.
I think those are great because they're in two different sectors. Do you think part of it, though, is that, again, they have the right business model and pricing? Even with Wise, if they charged you $1,000 for that same thing, would you rave about it? Would you have gotten the value? Is it worth $1,000 to you?
Exactly. And they did a lot of NPS survey, a customer survey early on. Then they realized the time and the fee is the most important lever. So they like try to minimize as much as possible. And to
Yeah.
your point, if it was $1,000, like they would like, oh, it's okay. I'll just wait and go to Bank of America.
Yeah, that makes sense. I love that. Switching gears a little bit, another topic we wanted to discuss was around partnerships. And I know this is interesting to you too. When is the right time to form meaningful partnerships?
Really, I said as a founder, I think it's a kind of a like a sensitive battle because you want company to be like profitable and be successful and like big clients sound if I get that deal, like it will be like sustainable for a while. So it's a hard battle, but at the same time, if you think in the long term, for example, like in the AI world, the all these like rapper companies are dying because once the big guys see what's working, they just copy right away and then you like non-existent. So I think it's having a long-term view and like thinking about very in the calculated fashion, like how long you can survive and like how important it is to have this kind of a big clients. Otherwise, you become is having a like a little agency working for a few big clients, and big closing big deals takes a long time. And small startups, for example, like having security solution for banking, they end up switching to small businesses or small banks because the life the closing deals takes so long. So I think there's pros and cons, and I don't have a like one answer for everybody. I think it depends on the business and the what kind of the product you're serving. But I was listening to interesting interview by the CEO of Databrick and Ben Thompson, who was talking about how they acquire Mosaic ML. And Mosaic ML had an amazing model, and Databrick has the data in the Salesforce. And like they have a same value, meaning they're both providing tools for the ecosystem to grow instead of having a proprietary data. So both of them has a great value, and they have things that they don't have to each other. So that's a great fit for like potential acquisition or like long-term partnerships. So I think it's very calculated. I think founders and CEOs should have that kind of like very calculated fashion and like understanding the whole ecosystem and how they are fitting in the value system. And in the AI world, think about BlackBerry and Apple, how they approach differently. BlackBerry totally forgot about the media and the like TV and music players in the ecosystem. And Apple understood like the different players better. So I think having that perspective for the upcoming future will be also critical in terms of building the partnerships.
Yeah, I love that. It's so funny you bring up Apple and BlackBerry because I love that example. And one of the things I always thought was so interesting is that one of the other reasons that Apple won is because they changed the business model. Like they partnered with AT&T and they switched from time to data. It changed everything because time is finite. So when you were charging minutes per day, there was a cap. And when you started charging with data, which they were better at than BlackBerry, especially with the app ecosystem and actually bringing the web in a more usable way to the device, I just think that's so cool because it's such an interesting way in which the product and that business model really helped them explode a market that they now dominate.
Yeah, this is such an interesting time. Everybody's in transition and like we almost have to reinvent our roles, like for
Mm.
everybody, especially in tech. And I watched them one of the tech talks about Titanic and how they sunk and they believe that like everybody is doing amazing and they're all professionals and they made little mistakes here and there's some blind spots. That's why the ship sank. So I think it's a very critical time for everybody. It's a very open and be curious about what's happening in the ecosystem.
I think that's super sage advice. And one of the other things I wanted to talk about is you're a serial founder. You have a new company, a new startup, and you are focused on helping people make the change they want to make. That's how I would characterize it. Will you tell us a little bit about your company and what the vision is?
Definitely. For now, I'll call it a project and experimentation, not a startup yet. But
Okay.
I haven't like really figured out it's gonna be like a scalable and repeatable business yet. And at this point, because of all this my experience, I can say lightly, it may not be a big business because it doesn't I'm not really attached to the idea. This I am the idea. When I started 20 years ago, I was like, if it goes fail, I'm the failure. I'm grateful that I'm a little detached to the idea, even if I'm very passionate about it. So the reason I started was last year I was burnt out and I wanted to figure out what I'm going to do next. And there was no playbook or framework that I can like, oh, I can rely on to this. It was random. And I realized I've been wing it the whole time. Very transient, like who I'm talking to and what news I'm reading and what opportunities comes my way. And this post COVID time, so everybody's trying to set their new foundations. Like they were like, I was at home and like looking at computer all day. And now I'm out there with the AI layoffs and like geopolitical situations. Like, how am I setting my foundation and how am I going to live again? So I think everybody thinking about work-life balance and I was burnt out and what does even like loyalty means to a company when I just get laid off like in like 30 minutes. I think a lot of people are thinking about this. So I thought it would be a good opportunity for like-minded professionals, like high achievers who has always answers. Now, like we should be able to have a courage to say, I don't know. And I want to figure it out and more in a long term. So that's why I started this. And it's more like a passion project. And this time is a little different because I don't know if I'm going to raise money and go into the VC world. I'm thinking more about partnership that I can work with professionals who can support each other. And maybe we can make it into a partnership and maybe we can automate a lot of things with AI. Automation and it's more like passively growing. And then we can think about what are the big levers to move the needle so we can make a bigger impact and all the operations are running with AI. So there's a term called three founder unicorn. So some optimize said there might be a $1 billion company run by one. So I'm thinking that could be a really good experimentation for us to try. So the program is cohort based, peer review plus daily introspection and group coaching. So there are a lot of customer touch points and at the same time, the community aspect of it. So it's very challenging product. It's not a consumer or B2B. We make something and sell or we acquire users through subscription. So a lot of little pieces that are very challenging and a new problem for me to solve. So it's very exciting.
Yeah, it's an ambitious project, so it's appropriate. You have such great experience, I'm sure you'll bring to bear as you're thinking through that. So we wish you luck on that journey too. This has been such a great conversation, Shinyoung. One last question I'm curious about. You've had a lot of experience across a lot of different products, types of companies. So what do you think that high performance companies do that is better than average performers?
That's a great question. I think it's also can change by the stage of the company, how like the maturity. But what I've seen is the company is a like organism. It's like a creature, like set of people, and the founder, CEO, and how the culture grows make the whole creature some kind of an animal. And is it growing or not growing? It's related to how everybody collaborating with each other and learning from each other and learning from the market. So the biggest difference, they open and curious and growing, or do they have a really set solution? And this is the answer and just go. And if it fails, and then go again. And the speed of the growth and the mindset seems to be the biggest difference that I've seen so far. And the growth mindset includes curiosity and being humble and being able to actively listen to others. So that's what I've seen so far.
Curious, thriving, and flexible versus rigid. I love that. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, in the startups, how many hypotheses are they validating every month or every week? That's like a speed of the learning. So
Mm.
having that kind of a growth machine, like knowing like how to run tests scientifically and how that's applying to the product and how customer feedback is applied to the product growth. I think it's all connected. The building as well as having a growth mindset seems to be the success formula.
This has been a really wonderful conversation, as I knew it would be. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Nita.
Thanks so much for listening to Good Revenue. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe to the show, give us a rating, or leave us a review. It helps other listeners find us, and we really appreciate your support. You can also catch full videos and highlights on our YouTube channel.